Hello to all our dear listeners tuning into the channel The Maid's Secret Daughter They Tried to Hide. Today's story is titled The Millionaire Was Ready to Say Goodbye Out Until a Poor Girl Walked In and Said, "Let me try it." Imagine standing on top of the world, looking out from a penthouse that costs more than most people earn in 10 lifetimes, only to realize that you are completely, utterly powerless. You have the private jets, the senators on speed dial, and a bank account that looks like a phone number, but none of it can buy a single ounce of oxygen for the person you love most. It's a sickening, gut-wrenching irony that turns your golden palace into a cold, glass cage. The following is a story sent to us by a listener, who asked us to share it with you so they could receive your valuable advice and thoughts in the comments section below. The story begins now. Julian Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Boston office, the city lights flickering below like dying embers. At 52, he was the king of Sterling Biotech, a man whose name was synonymous with progress and power. But tonight, the silence in the room was deafening. His phone sat on the mahogany desk, glowing with a missed call from Dr. Aries at Mass General. He didn't need to pick it up to know what the message was. He'd already flown in specialists from Zurich, London, and Tokyo. He'd spent $60 million in 6 months on a private research wing just for his daughter, Ava. And yet, the answer was always the same: there is nothing left to do. Ava was only 12. Just a year ago, she was the light of his life, a girl who could outcalculate his best accountants and outrun his security team on the soccer field. Now, she was a ghost in a hospital bed, her body failing due to a rare neural decay that the medical world called a statistical anomaly. Julian's breath hitched as he finally pressed play on the voicemail. Julian, the doctor's voice was heavy, professional, and terrifyingly final. The latest scans show the degradation has reached the brain stem. We need to discuss palliative care. Making her comfortable for the final days. Comfortable. The word felt like a physical blow to his gut. Julian roared in frustration, sweeping a line of crystal awards off his desk. The glass shattered against the floor, a million sparkling pieces reflecting his own broken reality. He didn't want comfortable. He wanted his daughter back. He walked out of his office, ignoring his assistant's concerned gaze, and drove himself to the hospital. No driver, no security. Just a father racing against a clock that was about to strike midnight. When he arrived at the pediatric wing, the air felt thin, sterilized, and hopeless. He sat by Ava's bed, holding her limp, cool hand. The machines hummed a rhythmic, taunting song, the sound of a life being sustained by electricity instead of spirit. He whispered to her about the trips they'd take, the horse he'd bought her for her birthday, anything to keep the darkness at bay. But her eyes remained closed, her chest rising only because a pump forced it to. "I won't let you go," he sobbed into the white linens. "I'll buy the hospital. I'll buy the whole city. Someone, somewhere, has to have the answer." Just as the sun began to peek over the harbor, a soft knock came at the door. Julian wiped his eyes, expecting another nurse with another tray of useless medication. Instead, a young woman stood there. She couldn't have been more than 20. She wore a faded denim jacket and carried a small, worn leather bag. She looked out of place in this high-tech temple of medicine. "Mr. Sterling," she asked, her voice quiet but strangely steady. "Not now," Julian barked, turning back to his daughter. "The specialists are due at 10. Leave the room." The girl didn't flinch. She stepped further into the room, her eyes fixed on Ava. "The specialists will tell you to turn off the machines, Julian. They'll tell you the brain is silent." Julian spun around, his eyes narrow and dangerous. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" "My mother was a maid in your house 10 years ago," she said, her gaze never wavering. "You don't remember us, but I remember Ava. She used to share her books with me in the garden." She took a breath, looking at the complex monitors surrounding the bed. "I've been where she is. Locked inside. The doctors told my mother I was a vegetable. They told her to sign the papers and walk away." Julian felt a flicker of something. Was it anger or a tiny, terrifying spark of hope? "And?" The girl stepped up to the bedside, reaching out a hand toward Ava's forehead. The doctors were wrong. I found my way out. And I can help her find hers. She looked Julian directly in the eye, a gaze so intense it felt like a command. Let me try. Julian stared at the girl, Maya, and for a split second, the polished, cynical armor of a billionaire CEO cracked. He looked at her worn leather bag and her thrift store jacket, then back at the $10 million worth of life support machinery keeping Ava's heart beating. It was a joke. It was a cruel, cosmic joke to think that this girl, who likely hadn't seen the inside of a medical school, could do what the world's leading neurologists couldn't. But then he looked at her eyes. They weren't filled with the pity he saw in the nurses or the cold calculation he saw in the doctors. They were filled with a terrifying, absolute certainty. You're telling me you were like this? Julian's voice was a raspy whisper. Brain dead? Or a vegetable? I was locked in for 6 months, Maya said, stepping closer to Ava. I could hear my mother crying every night. I could feel the coldness of the 4 fluids. I was screaming inside, but my body was a tomb. The doctors told her to donate my organs. They said there was no electrical activity. But my mother didn't listen to the machines. She listened to me. Before Julian could respond, the door swung open. Dr. Aries walked in, flanked by 2 residents and a stern-looking woman in a designer suit, Julian's ex-wife, Catherine. The tension in the room spiked instantly. Catherine looked at Maya with a mixture of confusion and disgust, her eyes flicking to the girl's tattered sneakers. Julian, who is this? Catherine demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. And why is she touching our daughter's bed? She says she can help, Julian stammered, feeling the absurdity of the sentence as it left his mouth. Dr. Aries stepped forward, a patronizing smile tugging at his lips. Mr. Sterling, we discussed this. We are at the stage of neurological finality. I understand the desire for a miracle, but bringing in, what is this? A faith healer? A student? It's not only unprofessional, it's a violation of hospital protocol. I'm not a healer, Maya said, turning to face the doctor. Her calm was unsettling. I'm a survivor of the same protocol you used on me at the clinic in New Jersey 4 years ago. Dr. Aries, don't you recognize me? Or do you only remember the patients who fit your statistics? The color drained from Dr. Aries' face so quickly it was as if someone had pulled a plug. He adjusted his glasses, his hands suddenly trembling. For a man who prided himself on his composure, he looked like he had just seen a ghost rise from a grave. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, hacking sound came out. Catherine looked between the doctor and the girl, her maternal instinct sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Julian saw it too, the flicker of recognition in the doctor's eyes that was instantly replaced by a mask of professional outrage. Maya didn't wait for him to recover. She turned back to Julian. Every minute you waste arguing with them, Ava drifts further away. The doctors aren't fighting for her anymore, they're fighting for their reputations. If you want her back, you have to decide now. Is your daughter a person, or is she just a case study? Julian looked at the monitors. The brain waves were flat, a mocking horizontal line. He looked at Aries, who was now whispering furiously into his headset, and then at Maya, who stood waiting like a soldier. He realized then that that safe path lead only to a funeral. The silence stretched, heavy with the weight of a life hanging in the balance, until Julian finally spoke 2 words that felt like a death warrant and a prayer all at once. Everyone out. As the room cleared, Dr. Aries leaned in close to Julian, his voice a low, venomous hiss. If you do this, Julian, you aren't just risking your daughter, you're destroying the only legacy you have left. The ICU room felt different now. Without the hum of the medical staff and the constant shuffling of clipboards, it felt like a chapel. Or a tomb. Catherine refused to leave the hallway, her muffled sobs echoing through the heavy door. Inside, Julian stood by the window, his back to Maya. He felt like he was betraying every scientific principle his company was built on. What do you need? Julian asked, his voice hollow. Money? Equipment? I can have anything flown in within the hour. I don't need your money, Julian, Maya said, kneeling by her leather bag. I need you to be her father, not her financier. Sit by her. Talk to her. Not about the horse you bought her or the money you spent. Talk to her about the time you taught her to tie her shoes. Talk to her about the things that made her laugh before all of this. She pulled out a small glass vial containing a dark, viscous oil and a set of silver tuning forks. To Julian, it looked like medieval alchemy. He wanted to scream at her to stop, to call security, to go back to the world where things made sense. But he watched as Maya took Ava's hand, not with the clinical precision of a nurse, but with the tenderness of a sister. She began to rub the oil into specific points on Ava's palms and temples, her movements rhythmic and intentional. This is an insult to science, a voice boomed from the doorway. Julian turned to see Marcus Thorne, his business partner and the chairman of the board at Sterling Biotech. Thorne wasn't just a businessman, he was a shark. He lived for the stock price, and right now, the rumors of the CEO's daughter were making the market twitchy. Behind him stood a team of lawyers and a stone-faced security detail. Julian, have you lost your mind? Thorne hissed, stepping into the room. The board is already talking about an emergency vote of no confidence. You're in a public hospital, letting a trespasser perform voodoo on the air to a multi-billion-dollar empire. Do you have any idea what this does to our clinical trial reputation? Get out, Marcus, Julian said, his voice deceptively quiet. I won't, Thorne countered. I've already filed for an emergency injunction. We're having Ava transferred to a private facility under the board's guardianship. You're clearly unfit to make medical decisions right now. You're grieving, and this girl is a predator taking advantage of your pain. Maya didn't even look up. She struck a tuning fork, and a low, resonant hum filled the room. The sound seemed to vibrate in Julian's very bones. The board doesn't give a damn about Ava, Julian said, stepping between Thorne and the bed. You care about the PNDD drug patent. You care that if she dies, the optics look bad for our research. Well, newsflash, Marcus, she's already dying. Your science failed her. Now, get out before I have my personal security drag you through the lobby in front of the press. Thorne's face turned a dark, bruised purple. He looked at Maya, then at the monitors, a smirk spreading across his face. Fine. Have it your way. Let the girl play with her oils. But when that heart monitor goes to a flat tone, don't call me to help you clean up the mess. You're on your own, Julian. Completely. As Thorne slammed the door, the room fell into a heavy, vibrating silence. Maya continued her work, her face beaded with sweat. She looked exhausted, as if she were dragging a heavy weight up a steep hill. Julian sat down, finally doing what she asked. He told Ava about the summer they spent in Maine, about the way she used to hide his car keys so he couldn't leave for work. But as the hours ticked by, the machines remained unchanged. No movement. No spike in brain activity. Just the cold, mechanical rhythm of a body that was losing its spark. Julian's hope began to wither. He looked at Maya, ready to tell her it was over, when he noticed something. A small, dark bruise was forming on Ava's neck, right where Maya had been applying the oil. It wasn't a bruise from a strike, but something deeper, like something was trying to break through the skin from the inside out. The night deepened into that strange, liminal space between 2 and 4 in the morning, where the world feels like it's held together by threads. Julian had fallen into a light, fitful sleep in the chair, his dreams filled with shattered glass and Ava's laughter. He was jolted awake by a sharp, rhythmic tapping. Maya was standing over Ava, her hands moving with a frantic, desperate energy. She was no longer calm. Her breath was coming in ragged. Gasps, and she was whispering under her breath, a string of words Julian couldn't understand. The room felt hot, unnaturally hot, despite the hospital's industrial air conditioning. Maya? What's happening? Julian stood up, his heart hammering against his ribs. She's at the gate, Maya whispered, not looking at him. The decay, it's like a thick, black fog. She's lost in it. I'm trying to give her a light to follow, but the machines, they're confusing her. They're telling her she's dead, so she believes them. Suddenly, the monitors began to wail. The heart rate spiked to 160, then dropped to 40. The oxygen saturation alarm turned the room into a strobe light of red panic. Within seconds, the door burst open. Dr. Aries and a crash team flooded the room, shoving Julian and Maya aside. Vitals are crashing, a nurse yelled. She's going into respiratory failure. I told you. Aries screamed at Julian while he grabbed the paddles. You've killed her. Get this girl out of here now. Security. 2 large guards grabbed Maya by the arms. She struggled, her eyes locked on Ava. Don't let them sedate her, she shrieked. She's trying to wake up. The spike isn't a failure, it's her fighting back. Julian, tell them. Don't let them put her back to sleep. Julian stood paralyzed. The chaos was overwhelming. He saw the cold steel of the defibrillator paddles. He saw the syringe filled with a powerful sedative that would plunge Ava back into a deep, chemical coma. He looked at Aries, whose face was a mask of professional triumph disguised as concern. Then he looked at Maya, who was being dragged toward the door. Stop! Julian's voice echoed like a gunshot. The room froze. The doctors looked at him like he was a madman. Mr. Sterling, her heart is failing. Aries yelled. We have to intervene. No, Julian said, his voice trembling but firm. He walked over to the monitors and, with a sudden, violent motion, ripped the sensors off Ava's chest. The alarms changed from a rhythmic pulse to a terrifying, continuous flatline scream. Julian, what are you doing? Catherine screamed from the doorway. You're killing our daughter. Julian ignored them all. He looked at Maya, who had stopped struggling. The guards let her go, confused by the sudden shift in power. Julian stepped back, his eyes fixed on his daughter's pale, motionless face. He had spent his whole life relying on data, on evidence, on things he could see and touch. For the first time in his life, he decided to trust the invisible. Try, Julian whispered to Maya. Do it now. Maya didn't hesitate. She lunged back to the bed, ignoring the doctors who stood back in horror. She leaned down and pressed her forehead against Ava's, her hands cupping the girl's face. She didn't use the forks or the oils. She just breathed, a deep, soul-shaking breath that seemed to pull the very air out of the room. For 60 seconds, there was no sound but the flatline scream of the disconnected monitors. Ava's face remained grey. Her chest didn't move. Catherine collapsed into the hallway, her cries piercing the silence. Aries checked his watch, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. But then, the flatline scream didn't stop, it was drowned out by something else. A small, wet, ragged sound. Ava coughed. It was a tiny sound, no louder than a bird's chirp, but in that silent room, it sounded like a thunderclap. Her eyelids flickered. Her hand, the one Julian had been holding for months, suddenly twitched. Not a spasm. A squeeze. Maya pulled back, her face ghostly pale, and fell into the chair, completely spent. Julian lunged forward, catching his daughter's hand. Ava's eyes opened, not wide, just a sliver, but for the first time in 6 months, they weren't vacant. They were focusing. They were looking at him. Daddy, she whispered, the word barely a breath. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Dr. Aries dropping his clipboard, the pages scattering across the floor like the remnants of his career. But as Julian sobbed with joy, he didn't see the look of pure, unadulterated terror that crossed the doctor's face as he backed out of the room to make a frantic phone call. The atmosphere in the hospital changed instantly. The hopeless case was now a medical miracle, and suddenly every doctor who had signed her death warrant wanted to be part of her recovery team. But Julian wouldn't let them near her. He hired private security to stand outside her door, and Maya was the only one allowed to oversee her care. While Ava slept, a natural, Healing sleep this time, Julian couldn't shake the memory of Dr. Ariz's face when Maya first confronted him. It wasn't just shock, it was the look of a man who had seen his darkest secret walk through the door. Julian called his lead investigator at Sterling Biotech. I need everything on the Meridian Clinic in New Jersey from 4 years ago. Specifically, clinical trials for PNDD. And I want the patient records for a Maya Walker. Mr. Sterling, those records are under high-level encryption, his investigator replied. That clinic was a subsidiary of the firm that merged with us last year. The data was supposedly lost in a server migration. Find it, Julian commanded. Or I'll find a new investigator. Hours later, an encrypted file arrived on his tablet. Julian sat in the hospital cafeteria, the grey morning light filtering through the windows. As he scrolled through the data, his blood began to boil. Maya was there. Patient 402. Her charts mirrored Ava's perfectly. The same degradation, the same terminal diagnosis. But then he found the anomalies. Dr. Ariz had been the lead investigator. Under his notes, the trial had been labeled as a total failure. However, the raw sensor data showed a sudden, unexplained reversal of symptoms. Maya hadn't just survived, she had been cured. But the cure didn't come from the experimental drug. The drug had actually been making her worse. Maya's mother, Grace, had been a janitor at the clinic. She had been caught on security footage sneaking into Maya's room at night, performing the same tactile therapies Maya was now using on Ava. Instead of investigating the recovery, Ariz had suppressed it. He had altered the records to show that Maya had passed away, and then he'd facilitated her quiet discharge with a hefty settlement to her mother to keep them silent. Why? Because Sterling Biotech was about to sign a multi-billion-dollar deal for a maintenance drug, a drug that didn't cure PNDD, but kept patients alive and dependent on it for decades. A cure was a threat to the bottom line. Julian stared at the screen, a cold realization dawning on him. His own company, the empire he'd built to save lives, had actively buried the answer to his daughter's prayers to protect their stock price. And Dr. Ariz was the man they had paid to keep the secret buried. Mr. Sterling. A voice interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to see Dr. Ariz standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked tired, but he had regained his composure. I wanted to apologize for my behavior last night, Ariz said, sitting down uninvited. I was stressed. Seeing a patient recover like that is unprecedented. I'd like to run some tests on Ava. We could use this data to revolutionize our current PNDD trials. Julian looked at the man he had trusted for years. He felt a surge of pure, murderous rage, but he forced his face to remain a mask of billionaire indifference. He slid the tablet into his bag. I'm sure you would, Ariz, Julian said, his voice like ice. But I think Ava has had enough of your tests. In fact, I'm thinking of taking the entire research division in a new direction. One that focuses on results rather than patents. Ariz's eyes flickered to Julian's bag. I hope you aren't doing anything rash, Julian. The board is very concerned about your mental state. They've already authorized me to oversee Ava's transfer to a secure facility this afternoon. For her own safety, of course. Julian stood up, leaning over the table until he was inches from Ariz's face. If you touch her, or if you even think about moving her, I will spend every cent of my $4 billion to make sure you never see the light of day again. Do you understand me? Ariz smiled, a thin, oily expression. It's not just me you're fighting, Julian. It's a system. And the system doesn't like miracles that it can't sell. As Ariz walked away, Julian's phone buzzed. It was a text from Maya. Ava is awake. She's asking for you. But something is wrong. There's someone else in the room. Julian ran. He didn't wait for the elevator, he took the stairs 3 at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs. When he burst into Ava's room, he saw 2 men in grey suits standing by the bed. They weren't doctors. They were private security contractors Julian recognized from his own company's corporate wing. Maya was standing in front of Ava, her arms spread wide like a shield. She was shaking, but her jaw was set. Ava was propped up on pillows, her eyes wide and terrified, her breathing shallow. "What is this?" Julian roared, his presence filling the room. "Mr. Thorne's orders, sir," one of the guards said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The board has issued a medical power of attorney. We're here to facilitate the transfer to the Blackwood Institute." The Blackwood Institute was a fortress. If they got Ava behind those walls, Julian would never see her again. She would be a research subject until the day she actually died. "Get out," Julian said, stepping toward them. "I am the CEO of this company. I am her father. You are on my payroll." "Actually, sir," the guard said, pulling a tablet from his pocket. "As of 20 minutes ago, the board has placed you on administrative leave pending a psychiatric evaluation. You no longer have authority over company assets or personnel. Including us." Julian felt the world tilt. Marcus Thorne had moved faster than he ever imagined. They had used the miracle as proof of his mental breakdown. They were going to steal his daughter to protect their secrets. Ava reached out, her small hand trembling as she grabbed the sleeve of Maya's jacket. "Daddy, make them go away. Please." Hearing her voice, the voice he thought he'd never hear again, snapped something inside Julian. He wasn't a CEO anymore. He was a father whose cub was being threatened. He didn't go for his phone. He didn't call his lawyers. He looked at Maya. "The bag," he whispered. "Now." Maya understood instantly. She grabbed her leather bag and pulled out a small, high-frequency device, one of the diagnostic tools Julian had given her earlier to monitor Ava's nerve responses. She didn't use it on Ava. She turned the dial to its maximum setting and pressed the trigger. A piercing, high-pitched squeal erupted from the device. It wasn't loud to the human ear, but it played havoc with the sophisticated electronic earpieces the security guards were wearing. Both men collapsed, clutching their heads as the feedback loop from their communication systems turned into a physical assault. "Go!" Julian yelled, grabbing Ava's wheelchair. He didn't care about the fours or the monitors. He ripped the tubes free, his hand steady despite the adrenaline. He scooped Ava up into his arms, her body feeling impossibly light, and signaled to Maya. They didn't head for the main exit. Julian knew the hospital was crawling with Thorne's people. He led them through a service corridor, through the steaming industrial kitchens, and out toward the ambulance bay. His heart was a drum, each beat a reminder of how much he had to lose. They reached his car, the nondescript SUV he'd driven the night before. He buckled Ava into the back seat, Maya jumping in beside her. Julian slid into the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles were white. "Where are we going?" Maya asked, her voice breathless. "They'll check your houses, your offices. They have GPS on everything you own." "Not everything," Julian said, flooring the accelerator and screaming out of the bay just as a black sedan swerved to block them. He looked at Ava in the rearview mirror. She was pale, exhausted, but she was looking at the passing trees with a sense of wonder. She was alive. But as Julian looked at the dashboard, he saw a small, red light flashing. The car's internal computer was being accessed remotely. The doors locked automatically. The engine began to sputter, the electronic throttle being slowly throttled down by someone sitting in a boardroom miles away. Thorne wasn't just following them. He was turning the car into a high-speed prison. Julian looked at the bridge ahead, the dark water of the harbor churning below, and realized that his e-safety features were about to become his executioner. The SUV groaned as the digital handcuffs tightened. Julian felt the steering wheel stiffen in his grip, the power steering dying as the onboard computer overrode his manual inputs. On the dashboard, the navigation screen flickered, replaced by a cold, corporate logo and a live video feed. Marcus Thorne's face appeared, looking down at Julian from the high-back leather chair of the Sterling Biotech boardroom. He looked bored, like a man finishing a tedious chore. "Julian, stop this embarrassing display," Thorne's voice echoed through the car's premium speakers, distorted by the remote connection. "You're endangering Ava. The car is entering safe mode. We are rerouting you to the Blackwood Institute. If you fight the autopilot, the engine will cut entirely, and you'll be stranded in the middle of the bridge." Julian looked at Ava in the rearview mirror. She was clutching Maya's hand, her eyes darting between the flickering screen and the dark water of the harbor below. Maya looked at Julian, her face pale but determined. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, heavy-duty soldering iron and a multi-tool. She didn't say a word, she just began unscrewing the panel beneath the glove box. "Marcus, you're committing kidnapping," Julian hissed, fighting to keep the SUV from drifting into the concrete barrier as the autopilot tried to force a U-turn. "I've seen the records. I know about patient 402. I know you and Aries buried a cure to protect your maintenance drug patents." The image of Thorne on the screen didn't flinch, but his eyes narrowed. "Science is about the greater good, Julian. One miracle doesn't outweigh the stability of a multi-billion-dollar research ecosystem. You were a visionary once. Now, you're just a grieving man with a broken compass. The board has already voted. You are being removed for cause. By the time you reach the institute, you won't even have a keycard to your own office." "I don't care about the office," Julian roared, slamming his fist against the dash. "I care about my daughter." Suddenly, Maya's hand shot into the wiring harness beneath the dashboard. Sparks flew, smelling of ozone and burnt plastic. The corporate logo on the screen vanished into static. The car lurched violently as the electronic lock on the transmission snapped. For a terrifying second, they were coasting in neutral at 60 miles per hour. "I bypassed the telematics module," Maya yelled over the wind. "Julian, you have the brakes, but the engine is dead. You have to steer us off the main road now." Julian wrestled the heavy steering wheel, the SUV feeling like a 3-ton block of lead. He veered off the bridge exit, the tires screaming as they hit the gravel of an old industrial shipyard. They slid to a halt behind a row of rusted shipping containers, hidden from the main road. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and Ava's ragged breathing. Julian turned to look at Maya. She was shaking, her fingers singed from the wires. "They'll track the last GPS ping," she whispered. "We have maybe 10 minutes. "It's not enough time to get to a hospital," Julian said, his mind racing. "But it's enough time to destroy them." He looked at the tablet Maya had used to disrupt the guards. "Maya, can you get me into the Sterling Secure cloud from here? If I can leak the raw data from your trial and Ava's recovery simultaneously, the stock will crater so fast Thorne won't be able to pay his own lawyers, let alone a private security team." "I can try," Maya said, her jaw set. "But Aries is likely deleting the files as we speak." As they huddled over the glowing screen, a low, rhythmic thumping began to vibrate through the roof of the car. It wasn't an engine. It was the heavy, pressurized beat of a helicopter circling low, its spotlight cutting through the fog like a searchlight from a nightmare. The blinding white light of the helicopter's searchlight swept across the SUV, turning the interior into a stark, monochromatic cage. Julian shielded Ava's eyes, his heart feeling like it was going to burst through his ribs. Outside, the sound was deafening, the rotors kicking up a storm of grit and salt spray from the harbor. Through the window, Julian saw 2 black SUVs tearing across the gravel toward them, their headlights fixed on their position. "They're not here to talk anymore," Julian said, his voice grim. He looked at Maya. "How much longer?" "I'm through the first firewall," Maya said, her fingers flying across the tablet. "But Aries has a secondary lock. He's running a wipe command. I can see the files disappearing, the patient 402 data is 60% gone." "Daddy." Ava's voice was small, but it had a strength it hadn't. "Possessed for months." She reached out and touched the tablet screen. "The code. It's the date of the first Sterling lab, the one in the photo on your desk. The 9th of December, 84-inch. Julian looked at his daughter in shock. Her memory, her cognitive processing, it was coming back at a rate that defied every medical law he knew. Maya typed in the numbers. The screen turned green. A massive data dump began to upload to a dozen major news outlets and the sex whistleblower portal. "It's out," Maya whispered, tears of relief pricking her eyes. "The world knows." Suddenly, the passenger window shattered. Julian lunged across Maya to protect her as a hand reached through the broken glass to unlock the door. It was one of Thorne's security contractors. Julian didn't think. He grabbed a heavy flashlight from the door pocket and swung, the impact sending the man reeling back into the gravel. "Get out! Move to the containers!" Julian yelled. He scooped Ava up, her legs dangling, and they scrambled out of the car. They ducked behind a massive, rusted steel crate just as the first SUV screeched to a halt. Marcus Thorne stepped out of the vehicle. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore, and his tie was loose. He looked frantic. He held a phone to his ear, his face contorted in rage. "I don't care about the optics anymore." "Get them in the car," he screamed at his men. "It's over, Marcus!" Julian shouted from the shadows. "The data is public. The PNDD trial fraud, the suppressed recoveries, it's all on the front page of the Times and the Journal. You're not a chairman anymore, you're a felon." Thorne froze. He looked at his phone, his thumb scrolling frantically. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, ashen grey. His men hesitated, looking at each other. They were mercenaries, and they knew when the paycheck was about to bounce. But the danger wasn't over. Dr. Ari stepped out from the second SUV, his eyes wide with a manic, desperate light. He wasn't thinking about stock prices, he was thinking about his legacy. He held a syringe, the same heavy sedative they had tried to use in the hospital. "You don't understand," Ari shrieked, stepping toward Julian. "You've destroyed 20 years of work. She's an anomaly. She has to be studied. I won't let you turn the world of medicine into a circus of folklore and oils." He lunged toward them, but he didn't get far. Ava, leaning against the shipping container, took a shaky, independent step forward. She didn't have her walker, but she held onto the rusted metal for support. She looked at Aries with a gaze so piercing it seemed to stop the air in his lungs. "I am not a case study," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "And I am not afraid of you anymore." Aries stumbled back, tripping over his own feet. He looked at the 12-year-old girl standing before him, the girl he had pronounced brain dead, and he saw the total collapse of his world. As the sirens of the actual Boston police began to wail in the distance, Aries sat down in the dirt and began to laugh, a broken, hysterical sound that signaled the end of the old regime. 6 months later, the Boston skyline looked the same, but for Julian Sterling, the world had been fundamentally rewritten. He stood in the lobby of the newly christened Ava Sterling Center for Integrative Health, a facility that occupied the former headquarters of Sterling Biotech. Gone were the cold, grey walls and the oppressive silence of corporate secrets. The space was now filled with light, the scent of healing herbs, and the sound of children's laughter. The center was a revolutionary experiment, a place where the world's most advanced neurological imaging coexisted with the ancient, tactile wisdom that Maya and her mother had brought into their lives. Julian watched as a group of visiting doctors from the Mayo Clinic listened intently to Maya, who was now a lead consultant for the center's pedagogical wing. She was explaining the importance of neural pathway stimulation through specific frequencies, the very voodoo that Marcus Thorne had tried to suppress. "The data doesn't lie," Maya told the group, pointing to a series of brain scans on a high-definition screen. "When we combine targeted gene therapy with consistent sensory integration, the regeneration rate triples. We aren't just managing symptoms anymore, we're remapping the soul's connection to the body." The medical community, once hostile, was now reeling from the results. The Sterling Walker protocol had already seen 10 children with terminal PNDD regain motor function. Dr. Aries and Marcus Thorne were awaiting trial for fraud and medical malpractice, their names now synonymous with the dark age of pharmaceutical greed. A familiar tug at Julian's sleeve brought him back to the present. He turned to see Ava. She wasn't in a wheelchair. She didn't even have a cane. She wore a soccer jersey, her face flushed with health and life. "Ready for the opening ceremony, Dad?" she asked, her smile bright enough to rival the sun. "I've been ready for a long time," Julian said, his voice thick with a father's pride. They walked toward the podium set up in the center's garden. Maya and Grace were already there, standing as equals with the center's medical director. Julian looked out at the crowd, hundreds of families who had been told there was nothing left to do, all of them now holding on to a new, vibrant hope. Julian stepped to the microphone. He didn't talk about stock prices or patents. He talked about a girl who walked into a hospital room when everyone else had walked out. He talked about the courage to look beyond what we can measure to find what truly matters. Today, Julian told the crowd, we stop treating patients like statistics and start treating them like miracles. We've learned that the greatest tool in medicine isn't always a machine. Sometimes, it's just the refusal to give up on each other. As the ribbon was cut and the crowd cheered, Julian looked up at the sky. He thought about the night he was ready to say goodbye, and the incredible journey that had brought his daughter back from the edge of the abyss. The glass cage was gone, replaced by a house of healing that would stand long after he was gone. In the back of the garden, Julian saw a young father sitting on a bench, holding his young son who looked thin and pale. Julian walked over, not as a billionaire, but as a man who knew the weight of that silence. He placed a hand on the man's shoulder and said the 3 words that had changed his life. "Let us try." This story serves as a profound mirror, reflecting the fragility of our human existence and the immense power of hope that resides within the most overlooked corners of our society. It challenges us to rethink our definitions of power and success. Julian Sterling, a man with billions at his fingertips, discovered that all the wealth in the world is essentially hollow when faced with the silent, inevitable fading of a loved one. His journey teaches us that while money can build hospitals and fund research, it cannot manufacture the intuitive connection or the relentless spirit required to fight for a life that others have already written off. The core lesson we take away is the necessity of an open heart and an open mind. We often become so blinded by professional credentials and institutional authority that we dismiss the wisdom of experience and the nonsense of traditional healing. Maya and Grace remind us that everyone carries a unique light, and sometimes, the solution to our greatest tragedies comes from the person we are most likely to ignore in a crowded room. Applying this to our own lives means practicing radical empathy and refusing to accept impossible as a final answer. It encourages us to look beyond the surface, to value the person over the patient, and to understand that healing is as much an emotional and spiritual endeavor as it is a biological one. Let this narrative inspire you to be the person who says, "Let me try," when the world says, "Give up." It reminds us that our greatest legacy isn't the empires we build, but the lives we touch and the hope we restore in moments of total darkness. By choosing to believe in the potential of the human spirit, we can transform our personal trials into a collective mission for a kinder, more inclusive world. As the creator of this content, I believe this story highlights that the greatest medicine is often found in the simple act of refusing to let go of someone's hand. We live in a world that prioritizes data over souls, yet it is the soul that often drives the recovery data cannot explain. True leadership is shown when those in power, like Julian, are willing to humble themselves to listen to those with no power at all. This narrative is a reminder that our shared humanity is far more valuable than our individual bank accounts or titles. It is my hope that we all learn to value the unseen voices in our communities, as they often hold the keys to our collective healing. Success should not be measured by what we acquire, but by how many people we help back onto their feet. When we bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern science, we create a future that is whole rather than fragmented. Never underestimate the impact of a single person's courage to challenge a system that has become too cold. May we all find the strength to be a lighthouse for others during their most turbulent storms. Life is a beautiful, unpredictable miracle, and it is our responsibility to protect that spark in one another. This story was created for educational purposes only. This story contains some creative elements and was produced using AI technology, with the aim of providing moments of engaging entertainment while delivering valuable, inspiring lessons to our audience. Disclaimer: the information provided in this video is for entertainment and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, legal, or financial advice. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The creators of this content are not responsible for any actions taken based on the stories or information presented.